Hey, Lane. Hope you're doing well. I just wanted to know, like, kind of with this year and everything being kind of all weird and different with the combine, what were your kind of thoughts on everything, how it all went, and how these guys did?
Well, we don't really have a lot to do with the pro day. That's for the pros, and I know it's a little bit different because they didn't have the combine like you mentioned. So, um, we don't do a whole lot in it. Sound like, Elijah did really well, ran really well. Said all the times were sub 4.4 and a lot of low 4.3s. So it's great for him to help himself, and I do think with him, you know, I think that it's important to understand his play count and his workload in a game is much different than a lot of these other receivers that you compare him to in the draft. So when you watch him, sometimes maybe he doesn't look quite as fast. Sometimes you got to understand, all right, he's playing a lot of plays and there's about, 5 to 10 seconds between snaps. He's not going back to a huddle sitting there for 30 seconds, So I've said all along he's an elite player. I should be a first round draft pick, and with his work ethic, he's going to play for a long time, you know, in that league.
So sometimes guys that are a little smaller, and you probably know this too, working on the professional level and also on the college side too. Sometimes guys that are a little smaller may get overlooked and they have to prove themselves in different ways. What does Elijah do to kind of overcompensate for not being the biggest guy in the world, in your opinion?
Well, he was 5'9" today, so it's not like he's a midget. And he's proven to go take the ball away from people. We actually played him outside at times, even though obviously his natural position would be inside. But, the guy plays physical, and sometimes there's guys that size that don't, and there's a big difference, and they're not tough. This is a very tough kid. This kid's wired right. Someone asked me today, this kid's wired like Amari Cooper or Derrick Henry, like all there is football. And that's all he knows, and it's how he works, how he prepares, how he practices. Those three guys remind me a lot of each other that way.
Go to Pranav.
Coach, spring practice started on Tuesday. What is your overall assessment of spring practice so far?
Yeah, we've had 2 days now. That's why we weren't involved a lot in pro day. We practiced this morning and watched a film this afternoon. So it's good to be out there. We've never had a spring ball here. I know some teams maybe had a week before they stopped a year ago. With COVID, we had none. So it's really good for the players, for the coaches, with some new coaches as well, to get out there. And, a lot of different guys to look at with, I think, 14 mid-years. So scholarship mid-years alone. So it's awesome to have some new bodies, especially I think 12 of them are on defense. A lot of those are in the back end.
Thanks, Coach.
We'll go to Nick.
Lane, you brought up Amari and Derek and some of these guys. Just what advice do you have for Elijah and Royce and some of these guys, having worked with so many pro guys in the past, of the preparation and what kind of is important about this process?
Well, I hope that, when we talk about pro mindset here, I hope that, we've prepared them for this. We have high expectations how they are to prepare, for every week, and treat them like pros. So I would like to think that, over the places we've been where we've done similar things, guys have had very easy transitions in their first year into the NFL because, it's not a shock to them about how much work they need to do and how they need to take care of themselves and prepare in training camp for the season. So hopefully that helps. And I think that our systems, mirror in a lot of ways what they're going to do at the next level. Where I know people at times say, well, they go fast, they're spread, so that doesn't translate. Well, that's not really what we do all the time. We just go fast, but we run the same plays they're going to run on Sundays. So I think it helps the guys a lot, and I think it makes it easy for the NFL to evaluate them.
Flip side of it, what's the value to the program of having guys from your team get into the NFL, recruiting or just kind of building a program?
Yeah, I mean, we want to obviously, get guys there, but, have a lot of guys for long term. It's marketing. If you're, a lot of those guys choosing to go to Alabama, they're going there because they've seen for years and years, the guy's success in college, and then, so many guys getting drafted. similar to, the days years ago at USC when we were there. So, that takes really good recruiting, more important than anything, and then development once they get there.
Keelan, go ahead.
Hey, Lane, thank you for your time. Last year marked your first at Ole Miss. So how did being at a new program affect the amount of questions you might have received from NFL scouts and reps over this past year?
I think they're not as round, as much. So I don't think you deal with them, where, normally they're here all the time in the season, in season, and, you have them around and, they're popping in and out of the office. But with COVID, obviously that didn't happen. So we've not had near as much interaction with them.
Parrish, go ahead.
Thank you.
Lane, I'm wondering if you saw Chad throw today and what you thought of his day.
I did not. Like I said, we were, we practiced this morning. After that, had to watch film and prepare for meetings and everything. So I did not. I know that may sound strange to you guys, but I would say your job's for the players that you're coaching right here. If we're recruiting some kid and I'm sitting out at pro day all day long, when we're recruiting them, saying, well, we're here coaching you instead of out there, or like I say, the assistant coaches walking around handing out their resumes.
Go to Mateus.
Coach Kiffin, here's Matheus from Timeout Brazil. Thank you for taking my question. Elijah talked a lot about having you as a head coach, how that helped it to develop this game. And you have the NFL background. Talking to some Michigan guys, they talk about like Harbaugh, who was an NFL head coach. How do you think that this NFL background kind of can help you on develop these guys, and maybe even for the college level can make them better players?
Well, I think there's certain things that, people can do, with the kids as far as preparing them when there's a normal combine and the interviews that they go through. And, we do that. So, when they get there, it's not their first time going through that. But I think, like we talk about pro mindset here, what we do, for their entire time here, I think is very similar to what they're going to do on Sundays and what the expectations are for them. Now it's different here. Here, you don't prepare and you don't do things right. You just don't play. There you get cut. But, we try to teach them that.
Keenan, go ahead.
Hey, Lane. Having that NFL background and experience, what intangibles do you think that these guys have that will make you, if you were still in the league, to go out and tell your GM, hey, I want Royce and I want Elijah on my team?
Well, you asked about those two, so I'll stick with those two. We've talked about Elijah, unbelievable preparation. People always say they want guys that love football. You go in a team room, ask how many guys love football, they all raise their hands. But, if you love something, you do everything to protect it. And that's what, those few guys that really do love it do. And, they're not sidetracked at all. His focus every day that we've been here with him, was all about being, a great player and doing everything that he could for his team, including bringing along players at his position group and other players. I think that, Royce played really well this year, and he's got film from before being a guard too, so I think that's very valuable, so people can look at him at both spots. And I think he played really well this year.
All right, and a quick follow-up, are there any players that you've coached before that these guys remind you of?
Not necessarily. I mean, I get the Elijah question all the time, and we've never really had that size slot player of all the places really we've been. There's usually been a little bit bigger and more outside guys. I didn't coach him, but he kind of looks the most to me like the Steve Smith, the Carolina Panthers Steve Smith, not the USC one. Just not quite as bulked up, but very similar player from the stop-start.
All right, we got time for 2 more questions. Phils, go ahead.
Hey, Coach, this is Phil Carell from Overtime Fantasy. How you doing today?
Good.
All right. So how much have the players on your current roster benefited from having a new strength program and coaching staff?
Well, I don't know. I like to think we played better last year than the year before, but you know, I think we got a great strength coach in Wilson Love that, you know, was initially at Alabama as an assistant when we were there, and then brought him to FAU as the head guy, and now here, and he does a great job with his staff. And I think our coaches did a good job in not having spring ball for a first year, and you know, going 5-5 with a very, you know, all SEC schedule and a top 10 bowl team.
All right, final question goes to David.
Hey Lane, you had a long snapper go through workouts today that, if I'm not mistaken, over his 4-year career, never botched a snap. You know, what does it take for a long snapper, a specialist like that, to be able to latch on and get an opportunity?
Well, it's specialists are always the hardest, you know, because you only got one of them, and so the turnover, you know, if there's not turnover, you know, with guys retiring or getting cut, then there's not spots. So that's always extremely tough, and especially at the long snapper, because, you know, guys are able to stay healthy for so long that they play forever, you know, so, you know, there's not a lot of turnover there. It's very difficult.